We're right here in Florence, Alabama this morning, everybody. DOA, that's Drew on assignment. Got my grandson Dan with me. We fixing to roll, everybody. You don't know where we're going today, do you? Where? Pope's Tavern. He's got it. Picked up on it, everybody. Right across the street here, Pope's Tavern. Folks, we're right here at Pope's Tavern with Mr. Wayne Higgins. Wayne, you are the curator of the museum here? Absolutely. And Wayne, it's been a while since I've been here. Now, Daniel and I are up here on DOA, Wayne. We call that Drew on assignment.
Gotcha.
Hey, I'm glad that you let us come to Pope's Tavern this morning, Wayne, because it kept me from having to go to the interstate opening down at Colberg Road.
This is going to be much better.
Oh, I guarantee you, yeah. Now, Wayne, Daniel and I are about to follow you through Pope's Tavern and let you give a tour just like you want to tell it. Boy, I'm so happy to be here, but I want to tell you one thing. Old brother-in-law of mine told me to tell you that we were related. That is Brian Hamilton.
Brian Hamilton?
Yes.
How about that? We're old car buddies.
Your old car buddies. He told me to ask you about the Wheeler rifles, too, before we get going today. So
I'd be more than happy to do that.
We'll do that. Well, Wayne, maybe there's something right here outside you can tell us before we move in.
Well, we could start with the street out front.
Absolutely.
Now, it's Hermitage Drive now, but originally it was part of Andrew Jackson's military road, which led from Nashville through Florence, Sheffield, Tuscumbia.
Ran right by here.
Even went down to Hamilton.
Yes, sir.
And cut across Mississippi and went down to Louisiana to Madisonville.
So Wayne, is this it right here in front of the tavern?
Right in front of us. That's part of the old Jackson military road. And the only thing that's left of that road are little sections like this that run through the towns that maintained it for local use.
Right. And we have some down in Hamilton that way too. Yeah, little sections of it. And Wayne, you can see them in the woods in places where the old wagons cut through. So it's very interesting.
It is. And at the time, it was one of the best roads in the United States. They were trying to get away from the Natchez Trace because of its reputation for murders and robbers.
Right.
And actually, the Jackson Military Road cut off the route from Nashville to Natchez to Mississippi to New Orleans by 200 miles. So this would have been a much better mail route.
I'm asking you one question here, Wayne, while I kind of pan around a little bit. Why would somebody want to stop here at this place?
Well, when the Jackson Military Road was built, the government stipulated that you had to have a stagecoach stop every so many miles along this route. So this would have been a good location for that type of business. And for many years, the folks in Florence actually thought that this building was the original tavern. But in 1988, we got some architectural experts in here, and they dated this structure to about 1830. But in 1988, when we did the restoration work on it, we found evidence of another structure underneath this one. And it would have been a log structure because there were no brick buildings in Florence before 1820. The brickyard was located about a block north of here on what's now part of the campus, University of North Alabama. if you're familiar with the campus, it's just about where the lion habitat is. And of course, I'm not sure how many people know this, but the University of North Alabama is the only university in the United States that has live lions for mascots.
My goodness.
And they have two, and it's in a state-of-the-art facility. But anyway, the house changed hands several times during the early 1800s. And as we go through, you're going to see it looks more like a private residence than it does a stagecoach stop.
Very good.
And for
Well, Daniel, we're fixing to go down and follow Wayne through Pope's Tavern here. Well, look at the texture of this old glass right here. That is really neat. He's waiting for us down here, though, folks, and let's go down. After you, Wayne. I'll let you grab the door, son. Thank you. Oh yes.
remember this?
Yes, it's been a long time.
Well, like I said earlier, you want me to go ahead?
You go ahead,
Okay.
yes sir.
As I said earlier, the house, it changed hands several times during the early 1800s, and just about the time the war between the states started, it was a boarding house. So when the war did begin, it was easily converted over to hospital use, and it was used by both Union and Confederate troops. Now, Union forces got here pretty early in 1862, right after the fall of Fort Henry and Fort Donelson up in Tennessee. Union gunboats immediately came up the river to Florence. And it's sort of hard to imagine it now, but at that time, this is as far as you could navigate on the Tennessee River because of the shoals that was here. So from then on, you had running skirmishes on a daily basis to get control of Florence because the river and the railroad both were here. The town actually changed hands 47 times during the course of the war. There'd be times you'd have all Union here, other times it'd be all Confederate. There'd be times at the hospital here, you'd have both Union and Confederate troops. The ladies of the town did not distinguish between the blue and the gray. What a lot of folks don't realize, some of them don't accept the fact that, a good portion of North Alabama was pro-Union. We even had the one county south of us, Winston County,
That's right.
was seceded from the state of Alabama.
Free state of Winston.
But anyway, during the time it was a hospital, 32 soldiers did die here. And most of them are buried in the old Soldiers' Rest section of the Florence City Cemetery. Back in 1988, when we were doing the restoration, I was allowed to participate in an archaeological dig in our courtyard area. We gridded off an area, went down about 2.5 feet, and I found over 150 fired bullets just in this one little area. We also found bone fragments that turned out to be both animal and human. Had a large number of amputations done here during that time, and some of the bullets and one of the amputating saws that they actually used here are on display upstairs.
Really?
Relics dealing with the war. Well, I was real curious about that large concentration of fired bullets. I'd been on dig sites before where we'd find a lot of drop bullets, but not that many fired bullets. So I did some research and found out that the yellow bedroom on this side of the house was the surgery room. So
Oh my
discovered
goodness.
that when the doctors removed the bullets from the wounded soldiers, they would just toss them out in the yard
They my.
and stack any amputated limbs and burn them. Because with the bone fragments, we were also finding bits of charcoal. So that answered that question. Well, following the war, a family by the name of Lambeth bought the house in 1874. Now, he'd be a postmaster here in Florence for many years. He actually used this old letter sorter here to sort the mail.
And we'll get a shot of that while you're talking there, Wayne.
Well,
So
the
this
Lambeth
dates
family
back to
would,
when?
Yeah, the Lambeth family would live here for the next 90 years.
Wow.
Then in 1965, they were getting old, and none of the family were interested in keeping the house, so they said it'd be a museum. So with some work, they opened it up in 1968. Now what you'll see on the bottom floor will be artifacts that will date primarily to the early 1800s period. You'll see a piece or two that might be older than that. You'll also see a piece or two that won't be quite as old. And then all of our artifacts dealing with the war between the states are upstairs.
Very good.
Now that's where anyone that survived the surgery room, that's where many of them were taken upstairs and laid out on straw mattresses.
Wayne, what about after the Battle of Shiloh, where they're wounded here then?
After the Battle of Shiloh, Well, it's sort of a weird fact, but the people in Florence could actually hear that battle going on 50 miles away.
Wow.
The sounds of the cannon were just channeled right up the river. And they knew a battle had taken place somewhere, but they didn't know exactly where until the wounded from Shiloh started showing up just a few days after that.
Amazing.
And from, like I said, from then on, Florence was occupied almost on a continuous basis, either by Union or Confederate. General Sherman was here, had his headquarters at Wesleyan Hall on the University of North Alabama campus. Building still standing and still being used. At that time, it was basically the main building of the campus. And then it was Florence Wesleyan University. It was owned by the Methodist Church at that time. Mm-hmm. Sherman did have plans on burning it, but one of his subordinate officers happened to be a graduate of the school. So he asked him not to. So he wrote out orders for any Union forces that came in after he left not to touch the university. So we were very fortunate there.
Okay, I've got you on pause right.
Well, this is the parlor, and as you can see on the wall next to the portrait of General Fighting Joe Wheeler, we're in the final phase of our third restoration on the tavern. We're down to the parlor and the dining room. We'll mention the portrait of General Wheeler. Of course, he was one of the best cavalry commanders that the Confederacy had during the war, and he came back to North Alabama after the war and made his home around Cortland, Alabama. If you'll notice in this portrait, though, he's wearing Union blue instead of Confederate gray. This portrait was done in 1898.
He's a little older, isn't he?
Yes, sir.
Another battle.
Unfortunately, I'm 5 years older than he is when this portrait was done. But anyway, he was only one of 3 ex-Confederate major generals that was allowed to come back into the United States Army and retain his rank. His cavalry expertise was needed in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders were actually under his command in Cuba. And of course, you know, he was a big guy.
Outstanding.
He was 5'2" and weighed 120 pounds. Sort of reminds you of a little banty rooster. But he was a good commander. And following the war, he would serve Alabama in Congress. He also represents the state in Statuary Hall at the Capitol. And he is the only ex-Confederate that's buried in the Union section of Arlington Cemetery. Okay, we're fortunate to have a few artifacts from the Forks of Cypress plantation. Now, the Forks of Cypress was one of the top plantations in the area. It was sort of our version of Terra. Mm-hmm. And we have a bank just a couple of blocks down. It's a Regions Bank that was built on the same scale as what the Forks of Cypress looked like before it was, unfortunately, was struck by lightning and burned almost exactly 50 years ago on June the 6th, 1966. And burned to the ground in almost just about a half an hour. It was very hot and dry that spring. Now, the artifacts that we have were in storage in the basement of Rogers Hall on the University of North Alabama campus at the time. I'll show you one of the pieces in particular. This piano is extremely rare. The Library of Congress records state that only 4 of these were ever made by the Loud brothers in Philadelphia in 1820. Of the 4 today, there are only 2 that exist. This one and another one in a museum in California.
Amazing.
And as you can see, it's in desperate need of restoration, and hopefully one day we'll get to.
And that says Forks of the Cypress, that label there. This is outstanding, Wayne. And I'm sure that is ivory keys on
Yes,
that thing.
And we think maybe that's one of the drawbacks to it, because it does not have the same number of keys that a standard piano has. So that may have been one of the reasons why only 4 were ever made. The other pieces we have is the secretary that James Jackson used. And of course, James Jackson was one of the founding fathers of Florence. He was a member of the Cypress Land Company that sold the plots of land that would eventually become the city of Florence in 1818. And we're now making preparations for our 200th birthday coming up, along with the state of Alabama, which will also turn 200 in a couple of years.
Maybe we can come celebrate with you. 1818, still
1818,
Indians
we're gonna
here
start in
then.
March. Actually, Florence is older than the state of Alabama.
Yes.
And of course, the grandfather clock that's behind you there came from the Forks of Cyprus. It was made in Scotland in 1800. And I'm sure some of your viewers will be interested in the Jackson family Bible.
Andrew Jackson?
James.
James Jackson.
Yes.
Yeah, you spoke of a while ago.
It's an 1828. It's a Thomas Scott version.
1828. Well, we won't be thumbing through that, but I appreciate you displaying that. Yes, sir.
And I was telling you earlier about some of the newer pieces you might see. And of course, one of our newer pieces is this 1905 Edison phonograph. Played the cylinder style records. When you went to the store to buy them, they'd be in little cases like this.
Wow.
And
that is amazing. Isn't it amazing? No, Wayne, I mean, really, can you think about how far entertainment has come? Can you imagine people in the house sitting around, close to this?
On Sunday afternoons listening to this, and would you like to hear it?
Yes, sir, I would.
Bad sound for 1905.
I would like to say something here. Thank you so much, Daniel. As a young man, let me tell you, you probably just heard something that you're possibly the only kid in the United States that was listening to such a recording.
We don't get very many in here. I'm sure most of my young ones, they're really in awe about it because it is, I guess they consider it an earlier boom box.
Yeah, well, what I mean by that too, though, Wayne, is in the whole United States or the whole world right now, how many people are listening to that?
Not many.
No. What was the recording we just heard? Do you know the name of it?
One of the marches of John Philip Sousa.
Unbelievable! Thank you so much. That's a thrill. All right.
Before we leave the parlor, let me mention our bust of Carlotta. Carlotta was wife of Maximilian, who was Emperor of Mexico during the 1860s. He was put on the throne there by Napoleon III of France. This bust was a wedding present to them from Napoleon III. Actually has his stamp on the bottom. It's made out of bisque. It's made in Austria in 1857.
Beautiful.
Carlotta was considered one of the most beautiful women in the world. Then when our war ended, Napoleon was getting a little nervous and started pulling the French troops out of Mexico. Carlotta went to Europe to try to gain support for her husband, but no one was paying any attention since Napoleon was pulling out. Maximilian, unfortunately, made a decision to stay behind, and he was captured by the revolutionaries and executed. And just before they shot him, his final words were, "Poor Carlotta."
Well, I think that Cinco de Mayo ties into that period, doesn't it, Wayne?
Yes.
Did she remarry that you know of? I'm not familiar with her history.
No, she never did. She went back to the continent, never came back to the States or Mexico again. She lived the rest of her life in Belgium.
Was she in Mexico at the time?
No, she was in Europe.
I thought they probably would have executed her.
She did go insane. She was very paranoid. She always had servants around her to taste her food. Okay, that was a popular way of getting rid of people in Europe during that time period, was poisoning. Well, we're in the dining room right now. We'll start with the portrait above the mantel. That's Ferdinand Sinoner. He was the Italian engineer who was hired by Andrew Jackson and John Coffey to help design the city of Florence. Our downtown is laid out a little differently than most cities of our size, where you have your courthouse and your square. Our courthouse originally was put at the corner of the two major roads that intersected through Florence, which was Tennessee and Court Street. Our downtown streets are much wider than you would find in most cities of our size. And then the one thing that the settlers laughed at him and made fun of him for, he provided for our city park. that's 2 blocks over. 1818 Alabama, this was still wilderness, and the settlers couldn't understand, why do we need to waste a whole city block for a park when all you had to do was step out your front door and you had all the park you could stay in. But remember, he was an Italian engineer. Actually, he served under Napoleon Bonaparte. And he knew how cities would progress over time, and he knew that one day the people in Florence would appreciate that park, and they truly have.
Absolutely.
And as part of his payment, he was allowed to name the city. So he named it in honor of his native Florence, Italy. That's one of the reasons why we have the Alabama Renaissance Festival here in October. Well, a couple of pieces that are unusual in here. Our dining room table actually started out as a piano being delivered to the Forks of Cyprus, and unfortunately fell off the wagon and was destroyed, so they salvaged what wood they could get out of it and made this beautiful table, which dates around 1840. The chest back here, a lot of folks don't know what it was used for. It stayed locked up most of the time, and the lady of the house would be usually the only one to have the key. And it was a sugar chest. We still could get our sweet tooth taken care of because we had honey and sour and molasses.
If you knew where the key was, you could get it here.
She usually had it on a chain around her neck. But
Now, a quick question,
Yes,
would
sir.
that have been refined or just brown sugar?
It would have been brown.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And it came in loaves and cones.
Still good, though.
Still good.
Yeah.
Still good.
I got a question, another question for
Yes,
you,
sir.
Wayne. This being Pope's Tavern, could a man drop off here back in, let's say, 1845 and get a tankard of ale?
Not in 1845. This was a private residence in 1845. As we go through, you will see that it looks more like a private residence than does a stagecoach stop. When the log structure was here, before 1830,
It was a tavern.
Yes,
It
yes,
was
sir.
a tavern.
But after that, the closest it came to being a tavern when it was the boarding house during the war. After the china cabinets here that are from 2 distinctly different periods. This piece was at the Forks of Cyprus, facing the Empire period, very heavy, plain piece. The candlesticks on top are some of my favorite. They came from the Forks of Cyprus plantation. A name that came out of the 1920s to describe that color was Vaseline glass.
Vaseline.
Vaseline, because of its color.
Beautiful.
These are much older than that. Sometimes when antique dealers get a hold of these, they put a black light on them. And under a black light, they will glow. They have uranium in them. I guess we say we only have a couple of pieces that are actually original to the house, but they only date back to the time that the Lambeth family was here. One of those pieces is this lamp. It dates to 1895. It's a Rayco. The other china cabinet dates to the Victorian period. You can see the difference in it. This piece is very important to us because it belonged to the O'Neill family. Edward O'Neill and his son both, very prominent citizens in Florence, and they both would become governor of Alabama and would be the only father and son that would become governor of Alabama until Big and Little Jim Folsom came along.
Love the china in the background. My
Yes.
mother used to have a set from South Carolina like that.
That's
Beautiful.
the castle pattern that came from England.
Right, and hers did too, but she had it when they lived in South Carolina. Unfortunately, the whole set was stolen.
Yes.
I found one broken piece, you
Yes,
know, unfortunately.
Stolen or destroyed. Okay, we're ready to.
We're ready. We're after
for the
you.
kitchen.
Yes, sir. Into the kitchen.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to say I know what that is, but I'm going to have to let you.
These are fairly rare in the South. It's actually a butter churn. It's called a cradle churn. So when you rock it, you measure butter, and you would only find these on your larger plantations. Everyone else had the old crock.
Yes.
Type.
Wow, that's uptown right there, isn't it?
It would be. And folks up north, especially around Wisconsin, have seen a lot of these. On the floor over here, we have the very first ice crusher in Florence. And it was at the Milner Drug Street when it was on court. And James Milner is the first registered pharmacist in the United States to have ever served limeade. He went on to come up with several other fruit drinks, and he's actually given credit for starting the first fountain service in a drugstore in the state of Alabama.
Incredible.
Got some great memories of those little fountains. You know.
Now we're going to put a date on that, if you would, so give or take.
Late 1800s.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Another piece that we have from the Forks of Cypress plantation is the cutting board and the dough board. The dough board here is Alabama marble, and it was mined at Sylacauga. Now, of course, Sylacauga has the whitest marble in the world. Italy even imports Sylacauga marble.
Is that a meat grinder, sausage grinder there
Meat
attached?
grinder, there are variations of the meat grinder.
And old irons underneath.
Yeah.
This
As
is
you mentioned, the irons, we'll talk about the iron industry in Florence. Over East Florence was really the industrial part of Florence during the late 1880s, 1890s. And I'm sure you can identify most of these pieces on the hearth over here. But this piece right here, most folks has found very, very unusual.
I do not know what that is.
It does open up.
Yes, I see that.
And I usually ask them, do they have a clue as to what it was used for?
Crank it and let it open and let me take a guess.
You open it.
Okay, that's going to be a popcorn. Is that a popcorn popper?
Well, we sort of throw you off with the popcorn
Uh-huh.
here. Actually, you set this on top of your stove, and it would turn. And from here, I'll give you one clue. From here, it went to the little boxes on top of the pie safe. And I know you know what those are.
Boxes on top of the pie safe.
You know those, don't you?
Oh, were they roasting their coffee there?
That's the coffee maker.
Is that right?
Yes, right.
Oh, so they were roasting it to give it that flavor.
And then ground them up in the little boxes.
No, I've never seen one of those before. That is amazing.
Really rare as well, yes, sir.
Wow, that is amazing. Now here's something right here. I have no idea what this
Well,
plunger
the ladies
looking.
would be the one to use this piece.
Who?
The ladies. First get you a big old pot of boiling water and throw your clothes in. This is your agitator.
Yeah, there's your dasher, okay.
But you'll find some of the old timers that said, no, they didn't have anything this fancy, they just used a stick.
That's right. Wayne, that's great.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, I'm a little interested in this plain block of wood over here.
Well, this actually came from the log cabin of Chief Doublehead.
Outstanding. Tell us a little bit about that.
Chief Doublehead was one of the
wow.
most important Cherokee Indian chiefs in the area, owned most of the land. And if any settlers came in here before 1816, they had to deal with him. You know, they had to lease the land from him.
One thing I do remember from many years ago is that you had a picture of him in here somewhere. Is it still here?
Okay, we don't have a picture of him. We have a picture of his daughter. And it's in the yellow bedroom.
Is that what it was? I'm going back too many years,
and of course,
I guess.
Chief Doublehead, he's a tough bird. You know, it was said that no Indian could even sneak up on him, and that's where he got his name, Doublehead, because they felt like he had eyes in the back of his head.
Is that a
his
huge?
own people killed him.
They did.
Up in East Tennessee, he wouldn't share the wealth. And of course, after land was ceded to the United States in 1816, that allowed your settlers to first start coming in. Now, there were some squatters here. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Fort Hampton.
No.
On Elk River going east of here. Well, that fort was built by the United States government not to protect the settlers, but to keep the settlers out. If any squatters crossed over that Tennessee line into Alabama, these guys would run them off. They would burn their houses, burn their crops, tear down their fences and everything. All right, we're going to the tavern room now. Now, when this was a boarding house, the people didn't actually sleep in the house. There were a number of outbuildings where people would sleep and stable their animals. You know, sort of like a motel of its day. But everyone would come in here to have their meals. Now, this exhibit on the wall.
I'm coming back to you, and I see it there.
Right. This tells the story of the Forks of Cypress plantation. It was built by James Jackson in 1822, and it had the distinction of being one of the very first mansions in the entire southeastern part of the United States that had the columns all the way around it. It sort of like a Grecian temple sitting on a mound, which was about 5 miles northwest of here. Now, James Jackson, one of our founding fathers, his thing was racehorses. He sent his buyer to England and bought Glencoe that had once been owned by King George IV. Now, he paid $10,000 for that horse in 1836.
My goodness.
About 1.3 million in today's money, which sounds like a lot, but you have to consider that that line of horse produced 14 Kentucky Derby winners. The first little filly that he sired was named Patona.
Lime of lime, molasses, and horsehair. The stucco on the outside, and those are still standing out there.
Still standing. 23 of the 24 are still there. Well, we not only lost a beautiful piece of architecture, but an antique dealer from Birmingham had just bought it, and there was over $1 million worth of antiques that went up in flame by 1966 prices.
Tragic.
Very
tragic.
Well, the one other national piece of history that we have about the Forks of Cypress, other than the horses, is that there was a mini-series made back in the 1970s, and I think they've recently done a remake, Roots. Mm-hmm. Alex Haley and his grandmother Queen. Well, this is the real plantation where she was. And she's buried in the family cemetery.
She is.
She is. Well, we have the portraits here of the Mr. and Mrs. Jackson, done by Thomas Sully, who was a famous painter in Washington, D.C. His records show that he did several of the early presidents' portraits. They also show that he did 3 at the Forks of Cypress. This one dates by 1825. Now, we only have a photograph of his wife's portrait that was done about the same time.
Oh, so this wasn't her here?
Yes.
Oh, it was.
This is her in 1825. This is her in 1879.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, sir.
And I'm trying not to get too much glare. I'm going to have to hit that from the side. She was a beautiful lady.
She was known as Sarah Moore the Beautiful. And that's when I started getting a few little giggles from the school kids when I did this is also.
Well,
Sarah.
it happens, Wayne.
But yeah, she was a tough lady. After he died in 1840, she took over the running of the Forks of Cypress plantation. They had another one in Mississippi. So the ladies of that time period, that was very unusual for the ladies to do that. Well, we had a gun factory just north of here at Green Hill, Alabama, right on the Tennessee state line, that made the Kennedy long rifle.
That thing, how long is that piece?
It is long. It's patterned after the Kentucky and the Pennsylvania. There are only 6 of these known to exist. And I wish this one was in original condition, but a major change was done to it about 1850. Now, the gun was made in 1835, and that major change was here. When the gun was made, it was a flintlock, and they converted it over to percussion about 1850. It's a period change, so it really doesn't affect the value of the rifle because everyone was doing it. Well, I point out these pieces, and you think that most people recognize what these are. Now, they're actually bed warmers.
Right.
But the most common incorrect answer that I get for this is popcorn pop. I guess I think about the old Jiffy Pop.
I guess so. It's kind of shaped that way, isn't it?
And this is sort of along the same lines as that. You put your hot brick in here.
Ah, I see.
And this is what the ladies would carry with them when they got in their buggies to keep their feet warm.
Well,
they would also carry them into church with them also, because especially if they came in late and that source of heat was at the front of the church.
they were crowded out.
You don't see this in the movies either, do you? The little ladies carrying their football.
Carrying their heat with them in there. I can see, you could put, they could put their petticoats or a blanket wrap around that and hold that heat in.
Hold that heat, exactly.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're ready to go.
All right, after you, Wayne.
Okay, a little bit of a step.
Okay, a little step down here.
Now this room was reserved for special guests.
Well, it's pretty quiet in here. I
Yes.
guess the bed is soaking up some of the audio.
But this was also the surgery room that I told you about
Oh,
earlier.
really?
Outside this doorway here leads to the courtyard area where we did the archaeological dig.
A lot of pain in here.
Oh yes, the sights, the smells that you would experience here would be
Oh, my.
horrible. Well, I told you earlier that 32 soldiers died here, and we ought to have some ghosts. Well, I've been working here on and off for 30 years. If they're here, they're not talking to me. But there is something to me a little spooky in this room. It's right here. This is a memorial hair wreath. Now this lady lived about 1865. That's about when she passed away. And she kept her hair from the time she was a child until she passed away. That's why you're seeing the different colors of the hair. In the center, this piece is what they would wear on their black dresses during that period of mourning. It's a beautiful piece of artwork, but I just don't think I'd want one hanging in my house. What the ladies would do at their dresser, they would brush their hair, pull the hair out of the brushes, and put it in this called a hair receiver until they got ready to use it. We've got several pieces of really nice furniture. And here I'll point out this chair. This is one of the rare pieces. It too was at the Forks of Cyprus. Now this is a Hitchcock chair, made in Connecticut around 1820. Now, his distinctive style was the hand-painted backs,
That's beautiful.
and then the tightly woven hemp bottoms.
Right.
And they were shellacked pretty heavily. So originally they were really beautiful chairs. Well,
Wayne, I can't get past this being the surgery room, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that's because I know what all's involved in that period, and there had to be a lot of grief
that's
here.
it. Like the sounds in particular would have been horrible.
Were you telling us that outside that door is where they pitched the
Yes, sir.
bullets and
bullets
the limbs?
stacked the limbs to be
Oh,
burned.
goodness gracious! You understand what he's saying? When they cut your arms, your legs off, here, bullets were from the battles and things, and they all went out that door
They didn't
there.
have any pain relievers. The only thing they had for the pain would be some good old local whiskey.
My goodness!
Yeah.
And Wayne, did you mention about the floors?
The
Were they-
original floors, blood stains were everywhere because
Goodness gracious!
it's a shame that we had to replace those floors, but that was just one of the structural repairs that we had to make.
No way around it.
No, sir. The bed here, these were called trundle beds or rope beds.
Exactly.
Have you ever heard the expression, sleep tight and don't let the bed bugs bite? Well, that's where that came from. Because occasionally these things would start sagging and you had to tighten them back up again. And these beds were sort of your extra bed that you kept rolled underneath the four-poster bed. You see how the wheels are turned so they could easily be pulled out.
Is that a wooden wheel?
Wooden wheel. Yes.
I'm not making many wooden wheels anymore.
And if you were anybody at all back in those days, you had to have a necessary chair.
Oh yeah, I see that.
Now this one has an unusual history. It started out as a regular captain's chair in 1790. Around 1850, they converted it to a potty chair. And then in the 1880s, they nailed it shut again and started using it as a captain's chair.
Oh, so it won't lift now.
No, sir.
Okay, but when it did, then as you
Have
can
the chamber
see,
pot underneath there.
there's
This
the
one is
chamber pot.
porcelain. It's hard to find the porcelain chamber pots anymore because their lids, especially, got broken. So later on, you would find them made out of metal.
Now there's an interesting old artifact, that rocking horse.
The rocking horse dates to 1865, and it is handmade. Actually, his tail is real horsehair. Another unusual.
I'll give you $30 for that.
Oh, would you?
Yeah.
Well, another unusual piece
Okay.
is the little chest here.
Yes, sir.
A lot of folks, I have them to make a guess as to what its original purpose was. And I come up with sewing chests, medicine chests, jewelry. Its original purpose, it's a salesman sample. The furniture guys couldn't take the full-size pieces around, so they had the miniatures made. Do you see how out of proportion the knobs are
Yes.
on it? That would be the actual size of the knobs of the piece that you would eventually get. And if the lady of the house ordered several pieces, then he may give her one of these as a freebie, and then you could use it for whatever. Exactly.
Yes. Very interesting little porcelain face doll here.
Well,
Replica of Martha Washington, I see.
Exactly. Well, behind you on the floor there, the two little black chairs, those came from Miss Maud Lindsay's kindergarten. She started the first free kindergarten in the state of Alabama here in 1898, and it's still going strong today.
My goodness.
Our quilts will all range in age from about 80 years to over 150. This one being one of the oldest. But in looking at this, you could see what people were wearing back in those days.
Very interesting.
Yeah. You know, we thought we wore some pretty wild stuff back in the 70s, but I think maybe they may have had us beat.
Right, and that looks like wool. I don't know if it is or not.
Homespun. That's your actual homespun material.
Homespun.
Yes, and this is Chief Doublehead's daughter. And that's the granddaughter.
Any of that family still living here?
The Huffs, very distant relatives, are still around here.
There.
Okay. The wedding dress dates to 1905, and it was worn by a prominent debutante in Florence. Her name was Frierson. She married a gentleman named Wilder Watts. He was a mathematics instructor at VMI. The dress is made out of satin with Irish lace. They had their own private railroad car waiting on them, take them on their honeymoon in Washington, D.C.
Is that right?
Well, anyone who actually survived the surgery here, they were taken upstairs and laid out on straw mattresses.
Wayne, I can't help but imagine that many soldiers might have been waiting here for their trip in there. It had to be terrible.
From surgery they thought would have the best chance to survive were taken up. The rest of them, any available room, and I'll see a lot of those furnishings that were actually the boarding house, see all that was taken out and destroyed, burned for firewood, especially in December of 1864, right after the fall of Franklin in Nashville.
Yes.
Union forces tried to catch General Hood here before he crossed the Tennessee River. And he was just hours ahead of him. But at that time, this place would have been packed with wounded soldiers, inside and out.
And I can't help but imagine that those that were in here, in this room, had to hear the sounds that were coming from that room in the corner over there, the surgery room. It would have been horrible.
You're here by yourself. You try not to think about that. Too often.
I hear you. All right, so we're going up to recovery.
Yes, sir. This is where all of our artifacts are dealing with the war.
Well, while we're going up, from me and our folks at Super 8 TV, Mr. Wayne, we want to thank you very much for meeting us and
my pleasure.
Opening up for us on a Monday.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I'm always happy to talk about the history of Florence, and hope a lot of your viewers will get the chance to come up and see us.
We love Florence. Look at this.
Well, the mattress here is very similar to what you would have seen. There was a double row of them that went the entire length of the house. And at that time, the windows were opened up on both ends for ventilation. There were also dormers as well there, so there would have been some circulating air. Because the smells would have been horrible. Well, one of our most prized possessions is an authentic Confederate flag. Presented by the ladies of Florence to the Lauderdale Volunteers. It was presented at Wesleyan Hall on the UNA campus. Presented by Mrs. John Coffey. They left Florence and hooked up with the 4th Alabama Infantry, which was one of the most renowned units in the state of Alabama during the war.
Same John Coffey that fought with Jackson at Horseshoe Bend.
Yes, sir. John Coffey was probably the most important citizen of Florence. He was Surveyor General for the Alabama Territory. He actually laid out the boundary line for Alabama and Mississippi. He commanded as Jackson's cavalry forces during the Creek Indian Wars. Also, his men were at the Battle of New Orleans. And after the battle, the Louisiana legislature presented him with a beautiful jewel-studded sword, which unfortunately was destroyed by fire in 1865. Now, this flag was carried by 7 different flag bearers.
You don't happen to have the key to that case, do you?
No, sir.
Okay, all right.
It's made out of silk with
Let me see if I
gold,
can
with gold
get-
leaf,
I think we're getting it good
and
here.
it does read, "Ladies of Florence to the Lauderdale Volunteers." It's patterned now after this flag, which is the first national flag of the Confederacy. Now, the nickname of the Confederate flag, Stars and Bars, this is the Stars and Bars. Not that one.
Not that one.
Not that one. That's the Confederate battle flag. It didn't fly on buildings. It was reserved for the battlefield and fortifications. They took this one off the battlefield because it looked too much like the U.S. flag. So it became our national flag. This is what would have flown over the Capitol in Montgomery. And uniforms were also a problem. You had militia units at the beginning of the war from both north and south. Some of the southern units came in wearing blue. Some of the northern units actually came in wearing gray, especially from New York. So the expression of killed by friendly fire, there was a lot of it early in the war.
Yes, sir.
They managed to distinguish on the uniforms. For the Union, the blue was no problem. For the Confederacy, that's why if you ever go to reenactments, you'll see the Confederates dressed all kinds of ways. Basically wore what they had from home. And as I said, this flag was never captured. The last flag bearer at Appomattox wrapped it around his uniform, put his coat around it, and was able to smuggle it back home. And during Reconstruction, Charles Stewart, who was the first flag bearer who was mortally wounded at Bull Run, made it all the way back to Florence before he died, and their home was where the Trowbridge's sandwich shop is on Court Street.
Oh, okay.
And that's why it's on the ghost token.
Just a couple of blocks from here.
Yes, sir. But his mother and his sister both served as nurses here during the war. And during Reconstruction, Miss Stewart actually wore this flag as a bustle, so the Union forces couldn't find it.
My goodness.
So this flag has a big story.
A lot of history there. And that's
And one of the very few that's not in the archives in Montgomery.
Wow.
But you can see it's in desperate need of
Yes,
restoration.
yes, and that case needs to stay shut.
Yes.
What else we got down through here, Wayne?
Here, the sword and the cane, these two were found under the floorboard of the Karsner House on Pine Street back in 1971. Captain Karsner, who lived there, he actually fought under this flag during the war.
Hidden under the floorboard.
And under the floorboards. And wrapped in that same material. Well, the gentleman that we have in that photograph, that's Henry Cox Jones, who lived here in the 1850s. And he was Lauderdale County's representative to the Secession Convention in Montgomery and voted against leaving the Union. But after the state of Alabama voted to join the Confederacy, most of the county fell in with the Confederacy.
Rough.
But you did have families that were split
Rough times.
on their feelings. Yes, sir. Well, a lot of folks don't realize that Alabama has a rich naval history. The Hunley, the first submarine to sink an enemy warship, was built in Mobile. And anyone ever gets a chance to go to Charleston, South Carolina, they can actually see the original there. Archaeologists are still working on it, but visitors are allowed to stand on scaffolding and watch them. And of course, the CSS Alabama was one of the most successful Confederate raiders in the war. And it was built for the South by Great Britain. And following the war, the United States actually sued Great Britain in world court for damages that the Alabama had done. And they won. Great Britain had to pay the United States $15 million in gold for damages that the Alabama had done.
Wow. Is this the one that was scuttled in Cypress Creek during the war? Or is that another ship that used to come up to the forks of the, or not the forks,
small
but
gunboat.
It was a gunboat.
It was more like a little barge.
That's what, yeah, because I didn't imagine.
Dunbar, I think, is the one.
The Dunbar, I didn't imagine the sails and the mast on it like that one.
You
like
wouldn't have had
Alabama.
anything like that on the rivers. It would have been those small, sort of like keel boats with little houses sitting on top of them, and with several layers of heavy timber. Some of them would deflect the shells, some of them not. Have a good variety of, the musket here was carried by a member of the 4th Alabama Cavalry that operated in this area under Roddy's command. And it's a British import. It's a Tower musketoon. Our Confederate down here would be considered a well-dressed Confederate. Most of them didn't look nearly this good. The colors on their uniforms indicated what branch of service they were in. And it was the same for both the Union and the Confederate. If you had the yellow here, that was the cavalry. Sky blue, infantry, and red was the artillery.
I see they've got a painting. Is that the forks of the Cypress in the back? This is, well, the last time I was here, this exhibit was not here. This is awesome.
Yeah, I set this up in '88.
You did a good job.
Well, thank you. I had a ball with this.
I bet you did.
This is a present from one of the gunboats that came to Florence in 1862. Now that's a 10-inch mortar. Took two guys to load it, and that's what these indentions are on the side here. They had an instrument that looked like ice tongs that they would hook in and set it over into the cannon, put the powder and the fuse in. You won't find a cannonball this large on a battlefield. These were used on gunboats and coastal artillery like you'd find in Mobile. Your most common size would be like the small one here. It's a 12-pounder. Now this one is a solid shot, so its damage would be done by just the impact of the shell. But they also came like this one, where they would explode. And your standard cavalry saddle was the McClellan saddle. And as you can see, it's made strictly for the comfort of the horse.
Yes, I see that. You don't wonder about that sometimes, Wayne. It had to be rough.
Sometimes if you ever go to reenactments, you may find some of the Confederates dressed in a color like this.
Is that butternut?
Butternut. And you'd get that by taking your homespun material and dyeing it with rust and walnut stain. You'll get everything from a tan color to a dark brown. You won't get any two that'll come out to the same shade.
That's interesting to know, though.
Good sampling of our artifacts that we have found in the area. Good variety of bullets. A lot of folks like to refer to any Civil War bullet as a mini ball, but the mini ball, if you look at that big one in the center there, that's cone shaped, that has the 3 rings, that's a mini ball. Now that's a 69 caliber. It's a pretty good sized bullet.
Better believe it.
I don't know if you can see or not, but on the top row, the second one over, now it's a mini ball. It's a 58 caliber, and that's what you're going to see more of, is that size. They're made out of lead, and of course the white on them is the oxidation.
Exactly.
Now these on the bottom are carbine bullets. Most of those had copper casings on them that just deteriorated in the soil over time. So you'll find some that are complete, and you'll find some that have been worn away.
Do you have any of those that you found on site that were spent, fired?
Yes, sir.
You do. Good. Very good.
Next room. And
Coming down there.
These were found in the campsites around this area. You know, General Hood, with his army of 30,000 Confederates, were camped all in this area. So the little ladies digging their
General John Bell?
John Bell.
Oh, man. Awesome.
As a matter of fact, Nathan Bedford Forrest, when he left camp, he rode right in front of Pope's Tavern.
I saw a picture of him. Here he
He's
is,
right
right
down there,
here.
yes, sir.
Daniel, let me get right in there. This guy right here, Daniel, you wouldn't want to have messed with him.
He was one of the best.
Tell my grandson a little bit about
Nathan
Nathan.
Bedford Forrest, one of the natural leaders of the Confederate Army, had no military training at all. He had the natural ability to lead. He was intelligent, very intelligent. So he could actually capture Union units that were larger than his unit strictly by deception. He would change horses on his artillery and go in a circle and made the enemy look like he had more than one artillery piece, but actually he just had one or two pieces.
Wayne, if we had Abel D. Straight here, he could probably tell this story.
Oh yeah, and would be very embarrassed.
Yes, he would. Oh my. The Wizard of the Saddle. Nathan
That's it.
Bedford Forrest. Wow.
One of the most popular lithographs that came out after the war is this one. It's called The Last Meeting. Most folks can identify the general on the right, or the left, excuse me, but not the one on the right. Stonewall Jackson.
Oh, is that Jackson?
Yeah, that's Jackson.
Oh, that's Jackson, okay.
Now that was the reason it was the last meeting. That was at Chancellorsville, where
Jackson
Jackson's
was
men
killed.
accidentally shot him. And some folks think that if Jackson had lived, that the war may have turned out differently. But that war is full of what ifs.
Stonewall Jackson.
Stonewall Jackson.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry I missed that one, and you are right. That was Lee's right-hand
His
man.
right man, yeah. And
Friendly fire. Killed by friendly
exactly.
fire. How's that
Jackson
go?
was one of the guys, the generals that would ride out in front with his troops. He would not be at the rear. And he was also called the Christian general. He basically required his troops to attend Sunday service every week. Read the Bible every day. And just a good man, a good leader.
Wow. Stonewall Jackson.
Stonewall Jackson. Okay, we'll head to the back room. And I will show you some of the actual bullets that we dug up.
General Joseph Johnson there. Oh, wow.
Now, what you saw in that case, we call those drop bullets. Those were never fired. If you'll look into this case on the top shelf, you can see what the actual fired bullets look like. They were made out of lead, so they were misshapen.
Yes, there they are, right there.
And right with it is one of the amputating saws that was
Let's see
actually
if I
used
can get
here.
right on top of those.
Basically a hacksaw. And right under it is what the soldiers were given to ease their pain, if they had any, and that was good old local whiskey.
Now these fired bullets here, is that some of the ones that were found right here?
Yeah, I found these here.
On the
Yes,
site.
on the
Okay,
site.
very, very good.
Along
That's a
that
good,
button that's there with it also was found.
good point of history there. Wow.
The Union forces, those guys had something a little bit better. Unfortunately, it would contribute to our country's drug problem. Laudanum. Now, laudanum is an opium derivative. The doctors didn't know what the long-term effects of it would be. So after the war, you had thousands of Union soldiers that became drug addicts because of that.
Like morphine
Like
addiction.
Exactly.
Now that's a good battle. Now where is that though?
That's at Kennesaw Mountain, Georgia. There's a whole series of prints done by this gentleman.
Beautiful. Wayne, that was just a up close and personal bloody fight.
Yes, sir. Using battle tactics that were outdated.
Well, these bullets that you found here, I mean, more than likely that came out of some of these
Yes,
soldiers. Yeah.
exactly.
You can just imagine what that did to the human body.
And also, we also found a grape shot as well. Came in various sizes. The actual size of a grape to a piece that was almost as big as a 6-pound cannonball. And see, these were fired out of a canister, and it'd be like a shotgun effect against charging infantry, and the devastation of those shells was horrible.
Now, is this depiction of Post Tavern right here.
Yeah, this
The
painting
sober-
was done last year by a lady, and she wanted to sort of give that ghostly image of what it would have been like. And actually, she won first place at the
See that?
North Alabama State Fair last year. Well, the Confederate battle flag. This flag is important to us because it flew at the dedication ceremonies at the Confederate monument in front of our courthouse. And it only dates to 1903, even though it looks like it could be a period flag. There's some things that you look at these flags to determine if they're period or not. One of them is the material itself. And you can see, with this material, it is just not durable enough to withstand field conditions. The real giveaway on a flag like this is that period flags did not have brass grommets. They were tied onto the poles. Now, with a little flag education here that I hope your viewers can tell other folks about, is the description of the Confederate battle flag itself. Most folks that I get cannot tell me why there are 13 stars on this flag. There were only 11 Confederate states. They put 2 border states up here because they had Confederate governments in exile. That was Kentucky and Missouri. That's the 13 stars. And I sort of cringe anytime when I hear Alabamians refer to this as an X. That is a cross. It's the St. Andrew's cross. It's the same cross that's in our state flag. Well, who was St. Andrew? Well, Andrew was one of the 12 disciples of Christ. And how did he die? How did his brother die? Peter. Crucified upside down.
Wow.
On this kind of cross. And so was Andrew. So that's the person where we get the St. Andrew's cross. You'll find this cross not only in Alabama's flag, you'll find it in Florida's flag as well. You'll find it in Great Britain's flag. Great Britain has full of crosses. You have your St. Andrews going this way. You have your St. George going this way. And within the St. Andrew's cross, there's another red cross. And that's the St. Patrick cross.
Very interesting.
For Ireland. And of course, if you ever go to Scotland, about 9 out of 10 flags in Scotland will have the St. Andrew's cross, because St. Andrew is the patron saint of Scotland. This is our only original Confederate uniform, worn by General O'Neill. And we talked about that family earlier. And it is Confederate gray. If we need to position that light.
I don't know exactly. Turn it off for a minute. Let me see if I'm picking up anything. I doubt if that does. That.
Is that heaven or hurting?
Well, I don't know, but we'll carry on anyway. I think we're okay right there. If I block this a little bit.
Well, it is Confederate gray, as you can see, but I wish we could tell. If we get a closer shot of the uniform buttons, these are Union buttons. Now, buttons were so expensive during the war that the Southerners would use whatever they could get, and there were no strict regulations about uniforms. So they would get what they could find. I have seen Confederate uniforms that had 4 or 5 different kind of buttons on them. The display here, this is what our World War I guys brought back. These are variations of the German Mauser, British weapon or two in there, Japanese. As for the machine gun, that's a model 1918 water-cooled Maxim machine gun. Anyone who's interested in boating, first motor on the Tennessee River.
Is that right?
It dates to 1912, and the guys were not fishing. You have any idea what they would have been going after in the Tennessee River that they could sell?
I would have thought ferrying people, but I don't know.
Well, it's all their muscles to make
Making
buttons.
buttons out of the shell.
Exactly, and today they're still being harvested on a restricted basis and being sold, I think, mainly to China for the cultured pearl industry.
What about, the local Indians ate those?
Yes.
Have you ever eaten one?
It was a major food source. That's why there were thousands of Indians here at one time. Maybe on one of your trips, when you come back, when our new Indian Mound Museum opens up, hopefully before the end of the year.
Right. Tom Hendricks told me it was closed right now.
Yeah, matter of fact, it was raised, the building.
Really?
Because it was in very poor shape. So we're getting a brand new state of the art.
Oh, we'll be back.
It's a more interpretive. It'll be some hands-on. Museums like this one, static museums are sort of a hard sell for our younger folks. They want to do something. Mm-hmm. So we're hoping that museum will help in that respect.
Wayne, have you been down to Moundville lately?
Not lately.
They spent $5 million on that tiny little museum down there, and it's they made it count.
Good.
It's beautiful. I was going to ask you,
that's basically when you're talking about Native Americans for the state of Alabama, that's where they go to. And of course, University of Alabama, I think, is really closely tied in.
Oh, they're the ones that's in charge of that. I was going to ask you though, have you ever eaten one of those mussels yourself?
No, never have.
Well, we got to try it, Wayne. We have to try one. The Indians lived on them. We got to try one.
I have eaten the oysters, and that was a big deal for me.
I think I'd rather go for the mussel.
And the only reason I did that was because my dad ate them.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the old printing press here dates to 1874, and it was at the Florence Herald, one of the older newspapers in Florence. And this particular press made one 8x10 at a time.
My goodness.
Can you imagine how long it would have taken to make several hundred leaflets or flyers using
Papers one at a time. So, Wayne, somebody actually stood there, and operated that lever.
There, slide the paper in, and I'm sure they were much faster than I am. And your letters and everything would slide down on a plate right here. And like I say,
where was the ink well in that? Do you know how that?
Rolled it.
You rolled it before you pressed it.
And pressed it on there. Yes, sir.
We've come a long way.
Exactly. I used to grow when I taught school. I used to gripe about the duplicating machines with all the purple ink. I'd get on my hands every day.
And you mentioned this sewing machine here a while ago.
So this is a Howe sewing machine. It dates to 1846. Top of the line, mother of pearl inlay.
My goodness.
And we even have records from the Confederate government where they had contracts with many women in the South to make Confederate flags. So there are a lot of originals that actually were sewn with a sewing machine. Now, as for Mr. Howe, he was a better inventor than he was a businessman. So Singer wound up with most of his patents.
I was going to ask now that we're still in the upstairs loft, so this corridor would have been full of soldiers, Union and Confederate.
Union and Confederate, all the way down a double row. And of course, our windows
on the ends
here for ventilation.
Very interesting.
And all of these are Alabama units.
Mm-hmm.
All of these are in Montgomery right now at the archives, waiting to be restored. And at the very top is the Florence Guards, which was another unit.
Point to that one again.
Another unit from Florence, hooked up with the 7th Alabama Infantry. They spent most of their time in Florida during the war. And it too is based on the First National Confederacy. And see, it was early because at that time you only had 7 states that had seceded from the Union at that time. But you'll see many based on the battle flag. Here's one here that they didn't know it at the time would eventually become the state flag of Alabama.
My.
And for a number of years, the Alabama state flag, which dates back to 1895, the original ones, they were square.
Like that.
Like this one. So I think it was National Geographic came out and they just took it for granted that the Alabama state flag was based on the Confederate battle flag. And it remained so until 1987 when I think Attorney General Siegelman officially made the Alabama flag rectangular because it was so hard to get a company that would make square flags.
I want to get this shot of General Lee before we go. All right.
For history purposes, he didn't own any slaves.
He didn't own any slaves.
But General Grant did.
General Grant did. This is going to be interesting going outside here, Wayne. You can tell.
Is
Is this
our courtyard area?
going to be just a bright here for a second with
Okay. I'll point out the area where we did the archaeological dig for you
okay.
as well.
Let me let my camera adjust here a moment, Wayne, and I just want to get a little scope around the back. So the architecture with this little nook here, indention, this is all on the original scale. It's all as it was.
Except for the kitchen. The kitchen dates to 1875.
Okay. All right.
And of course,
Are you telling me that it's only 50 cents for a child to come here?
yes, sir.
Man.
Yes, sir. That may change a little bit later on.
Yeah,
but
I wouldn't doubt
it. This is a bargain.
Yes, it's a bargain.
But, while we're out here in the courtyard, I'll give you the general area where we did the archaeological dig. And see, this door here leads to the yellow bedroom.
The surgical room,
Yes.
the surgery.
So it was in this area, right in here, right about to here, from the wall. We gridded off this area and went down about 2.5 feet. We wanted to do more, but we were under a strict timetable here because they wanted to open up the museum. So we had about 2 weeks to do this.
What year?
One little section. And with archaeology, you know, it's extremely slow. And once you get down past the aluminum pop tops, you start finding some very good artifacts. We've not only found the bullets and the bones, but we also found a few belt buckles and buttons, uniforms.
Just in this area here?
Yes, sir.
What year was that you were doing this?
Pardon me?
What year were you doing this?
This is 1988.
In 88?
Yes, sir. And they made the courtyard area, and the Florence Garden Council takes care of our herb garden here. We've got rosemary, thyme, we've got sage, tarragon, oregano, we have chives, onions.
So Wayne...
These were the things that the pioneers would have used to spicing up their foods.
Right. And even used maybe in some of the medicinal
Exactly.
things.
Especially the yarrow. I read a little bit about the yarrow.
There's some yarrow
and it was
right
used,
there.
For mental illness. So I'm not sure if I might make me up a home brew of that.
Well, make me a little extra. But Wayne, you know, you have just spurred my imagination. So you got this, y'all excavated and took care of this little area. But as we look around on the grounds here,
The stuff is all out here.
We can- right.
We were just finding too much, and we know it wouldn't be just this one little area.
and that's exactly where I was going with that. So as we walk and look around here, just know, and if you visit everybody, of course you may not dig, but right, a couple of feet under us, or
Exactly.
or maybe a little less.
Maybe even a little deep. Some of it was not quite 2 feet. But General Hood's army was camped all in this area. So as I said earlier, when some of the ladies in the neighborhood are digging their flower beds up, artifacts are still coming up out of the ground.
My goodness, incredible.
I've got a couple of great. The scalding pot here. Have you ever seen a scalding pot like this one?
Right, there's been a hog dipped in there.
Yes, sir. Now these are quite rare now because during the war these things were melted down for
Cannon.
shot and to make cannon.
My goodness. Early plantation scalding. Now, when does this one date back to?
This one dates back to the 1830s.
1830s.
And after the war, it was used for the big chicken stews that they would have for the Confederate veterans.
It was actually used after the war.
After the war.
Wow.
And this was actually made in Lauderdale County.
So the boys in gray ate from that pot.
They did.
That very pot. Amazing, man. Thank you, Wayne.
Would you love to have been around?
Yes, I would.
To, fly on the wall for those reunions they would have had.
I wanted to hear them do the rebel yell.
Some of them could have by then too. Well, the heart of our industrial revolution was the Florence Wagon Works. This one is a 1929 model. The Florence Wagon Works operated in Florence from 1889 to just about the beginning of World War II. But even then they were down to making lawn furniture, because there just wasn't a need for the wagons anymore. But in their heyday, they were the second largest wagon factory in the United States. Number one would go on to make automobiles. Now,
Well, what-
we used to make fun of
I'm gonna
anybody
hold you
that
up.
drove one back in the 50s.
I'm going to hold you up right there a
Yes,
minute.
sir.
Because when you make a statement about them being the second largest wagon manufacturer in the United States,
Yes,
now we're talking about bypassing Pennsylvania and Virginia and some of the old colony states. That is saying a lot.
That's saying a lot. And
Wow.
like I said, number one would go on to make automobiles. We used to make fun of anybody that drove one back in the 50s. Now, I'd like to have one now, but it wasn't cool to ride around in one back then, and that was the Studebaker.
Yeah.
Studebaker were making buggies and carriages, so they were already in that transportation mode of thinking, whereas for the Florence wagon, still pretty much the work wagons. But they were used all over the United States, and about a year or so ago, I had some tourists from France that came, and I was telling them a history about the Florence wagon, and they said, "Oh yeah, we've seen those." And I said, "You've seen them in France?" And they said, "Oh yeah." I said, "There's still some farmers over there using those wagons."
My goodness.
So I had to do a little research and found out that the government bought about 500 of them and sent them over with our troops during World War I.
And they're still there.
Still there.
Is that, that's incredible.
It's incredible. Not only survived World War I, but World War II
And still in use.
And still in use. They remembered
What a story.
the distinctive colors of the greens and oranges.
Oh, so that was the trade of it, greens and oranges on the color.
Yes, sir.
Florence wagon. I'll give you $30 for that today. So I'm,
You want to pick up some deals today.
yeah, I want to pick up some deals. Wayne, this is, can't help that. I'm going to go back to it just a second. I noticed that you have cedar shake shingles or shake shingles.
Yes.
I know that's probably not you have something underneath, I imagine.
Yes, sir. We
But-
have to because
Can't afford any
what we're trying to
leaks.
say is as period as we
Right.
can. That's why with our historical restoration, the gentleman that's doing it is one of the very few in the area that does strict, goes by the book, historical preservation. He doesn't just throw the old plaster up on the walls. He puts the proper meshing in there, the proper mixtures. Even the concrete has a different mixture now.
Might I take just a moment to tell you how much we appreciate you doing this for us today as we look around here, and
It's been a pleasure.
I hope that this spurs some interest. I know it will. Many people in the area that you maybe not get up to Lauderdale County, will come up now.
Right.
And we love Florence, and many people down there do. We talk about you guys quite a bit.
We're sort of a well-kept secret up here because, we don't have an interstate, that comes our way, So folks that wind up here is because they were heading here to begin with, because of what we have here. And there's something going on in Florence all the time.
I have often said, Wayne, and I have witnesses, that if I could go back and stay and live in any town, like I could live from the early 1800s on up through the current time, I would pick Florence, Alabama.
I surely would. I thought about it.
You would see a lot.
I'm originally from Middle Tennessee, Columbia, Tennessee, and when I look around here, I see so many similarities of my hometown up there. Just a great place to live, a wonderful place to bring up your family, because you've got everything here. Great medical facilities, one of the best universities in the Southeast. Has a variety of subjects being taught there. Restaurants, just about any kind of restaurant you can name is in our area. And just want the folks to come up here because there's always something going on. If you've got a computer, Florence has a website, and there's usually some festival of some kind each
Well,
month
I've
of
been
the
to
year.
one. They had a Renaissance festival just a block or two over in the park.
That's in the park.
And what's the name of that park?
That's Wilson Park.
Wilson Park.
And it's the fourth weekend in October. And I said we have our Frontier Days here the first weekend in June.
Right here on this
Right
block.
here on the grounds.
You have to be crowded, Darren.
Oh man, the craftsmen that are here. We even have the Davy Crockett guys from Tennessee to come down here to do some demonstrations for us. Next month it will be the W.C. Handy Festival.
Yes, sir, it will.
Fantastic music. So definitely want folks coming up here and see what we have in Florence. For a city of our size to have 5 distinctly different museums that's run by the city is pretty impressive.
Well, Wayne, it's been an interesting morning with you here at Pope's Tavern, and before we go, though, I've stumbled up on something out here, and I want you to tell about it.
Okay. Well, this is an old iron road marker that came from Zanesville, Ohio, that marked the road that would eventually come down to Nashville and hook up with the old military road. These you would find at junctions of different roads in Ohio and Kentucky. And you can see how they would point you in the direction you needed to go.
Zanesville and Lexington.
Maybe one of the only ones left in the entire United States.
How old is that thing?
Oh, it will date about 1800.
1800.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
And it would go probably more up in closer to 1828 to about 1820, since Florence is on here. Before 1818, there was no Florence, Alabama.
I see.
So I'm going to say probably 1820 to 1825.
Yeah, I see Nashville and Florence down there. My goodness.
You got Maysville, Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, and Zanesville, Ohio.
Now, I'm just going to make a point here. There are a bunch of folks in Zanesville, Ohio that don't know and don't care where Florence, Alabama is.
That's exactly right.
But back in those days, on the same sign, here we are.
There it is.
That's that's incredible, Wayne.
Florence was an important town at that time.
Yes, sir.
Because of its location on the Tennessee River, which was your main source of transporting goods, not only to this area, but if you saw Florence on a map, you could see in the different directions where wholesale merchants would send their goods up into Middle Tennessee, over to eastern Alabama, northeastern Alabama, northwestern Mississippi.
And they would have known that it was right here on the newly constructed Jackson Highway.
Yeah.